Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Charmley, and once again we are in North Wales. We are in the little church of St Mary's, Derwen. It's a redundant church. It's cared for and owned by the Friends of Friendless Churches. In many ways it's quite similar to the last church I was at. The last church should be in the previous video, Clocainog, in that it's a similar size and it has its medieval rood screen and other features of that period. Again, it's 15th century. A lot of the churches around here were rebuilt because, once again, to repeat what I said in previous videos, this was a period when the Clwyd area, and we're up in the hills now, like Clocainog. We're not down in the Clwyd, in the Vale of Clwyd, we're up in the hills above the Vale of Clwyd. And even up in the hills, the wool from the sheep was producing a great harvest that meant that the churches had plenty of money, the villages had plenty of money, and they used the money to rebuild their churches, to show their piety. This is a lovely example of a church up in the hills. It is, once again to emphasize, it is the church was the most high status building in the village, barring perhaps the manor house, and even the manor house would see the church as being of a higher status because it is God's house. And so a lot was laid out on these buildings. Now, of course, one of the things is that building costs were less than they are today. Materials would largely be quarried locally, and they would be given. There'd be an awful lot of giving, of labour, of materials, again, because it was to the glory of God. And we mustn't. It's one of the dangers we Protestants have, is that we think of the Middle Ages entirely in terms of the latter period just before the Reformation. We shouldn't. That is a period that has great importance, but it is not the only period. And there was genuine piety. The Reformation is a split in the medieval church. It's not the creation of brand new churches. In fact, of course, this church at the Reformation, it goes from being part of the Catholic Church, the Western Catholic Church, to being an Anglican church in Wales. But the congregation doesn't change, and the clergy don't change overnight. There is a continuity with the Middle Ages, not simply a discontinuity. And in this building in particular, we can see that very little is changed, that things that were here in the Middle Ages are still here, particularly the screen behind me. And in fact, this is unusual in that there is a rood loft as well. We'll have a closer look at that. But the loft would have had in the Middle Ages, there would have been about here where my hand is sticking straight up, there would have been a rood, that is a crucifix. And on one side would have been the Virgin Mary, and on the other side would have been the Apostle John. And that loft is accessible. We won't go up it because it's not designed for people my size. It's designed for small people, and I am not small in a number of ways. And also, it's not really, they don't encourage people to go up anyway because it's not really safe. But what would have happened, there would have been the potential for a choir to go up there and sing when it was appropriate, and also readings would have been given from up in the loft. In one or two places after the Reformation, the lofts are retained and they become private pews for the big house family. There's one example I can think of in Staffordshire where that's the case. Well, let's have a look around at this beautiful, now sadly redundant church, and I'll point out some of the key features. So here we are, and you can see, without me in the way, you can see the loft, and you can also see at the back that it's basically a windbreak to allow for people to come in without people inside in that rear pew getting a draft down the back of their necks, because we are up on top of a hill. This is a hill village, this is not a valley village. In the Middle Ages, most of the villages in Wales would have been up on the hills, certainly in these mountainous areas. The people lived on the hills. Now, what happens then in the 18th, 19th centuries is there's a move down into the valleys. And in some cases, there are churches on the hills that are then abandoned. and new churches are built in the valleys. But here the villagers remained up in the hills. You can see here the roof. Always good to have a look at the roof, medieval roof, 15th century, very fine. The sort of roof that you find in these churches that are single, continuous structure, but also that you'd find in a lord's hall in their country house. And there's the loft we were talking about. Now, as we get closer, you'll see how the loft sticks out from the screen. And that is quite a substantial loft. Some of them were narrower. This, in fact, sticks out on both sides. So you could get your whole choir up there if you wanted to. And here again is one of those dug-out parish chests. This would have contained the valuables of the parish. It contained the record books in particular. It also would have been used perhaps to store the vessels, the sacred vessels for communion. You can see here there would have been pews here, and as we look around there's the back, you can see where the bell rope would have been, and up there, little bell turret. There is a north door here, the north door, and there's a rather nice wooden eagle lectern that's given. That's 1929, it's dated, so this is a 1920 piece, and very, very nice. The pulpit is, of course, 19th century. There's candles there, and you can see behind you have the memorial to Elizabeth Price, widow of the Reverend John Price, Clerk, the 8th of that name, and last heir male of that ancient family. She was a good wife, and the best of mothers, a sincere friend, affectionate to her allies as well as relations, the kindest of neighbours, and a true Christian. She departed this life June the 27th, 1755, aged 88. Out of filial piety, this was erected in her memory by Elizabeth, her only daughter, and widow of William Jones, Esquire. Also the memory of the said Elizabeth Jones, who died the 29th of July, 1773, aged 74. And here again, that rood loft, it would have been painted, and of course the rood would have been painted and would have dominated the whole thing. This is a screen and a loft that is quite ignoring the proportions of the building which it is. There's that great east window, as we saw in previous buildings, as in Clocainog. You've got this whacking great east window. This would have been filled with coloured glass, with the pictorial glass in the 15th century when it was built, and through it we can see a house at the end and the hills in the distance. There's some interesting 19th century glass, Victorian glass. It's quite very conventional in terms of its depiction, this painted glass, but there we are. This is dated 1860, and here we have a slightly later piece that is 1869, that is a little bit more medievalist, shall we say. This is just, and here we have more memorials. There's the Reverend Robert Jones Roberts, Vicar of Llangan in this county, who died at Chester, April the 16th, 1828, aged 50 years. 1877 clergy chair, altar. It is an altar, this one. Look at its location. It can be moved forward. They're supposed to be moved forward. The Church of England, officially, certainly at that date, didn't recognise the idea of an altar. And again, we have on this side, look at that nice, technically, electorally, it's quite a primitive piece, and all the more fun for it, in my opinion. Clearly it's been made relatively locally for the building. But again, you can see where there's been some restoration on the screen, where damaged pieces have been replaced in a lighter wood. And you've got this vine here. I am the vine, you are the branches. You see, the vine has a theological meaning to it. We've got our organ here, our harmonium, quite battered, as you can see. Again, this church is now redundant. It is electric. It may well still work. A Rushworthy and Dreeper, piano and organ manufacturer. 11 and 13 Islington, Liverpool. So this was made in Liverpool. It's the back of the screen, and you can see there the various patterns, tracery there is in that pierced lower section. And that's quite a feature of the screens in this area. Some screens, as in East Anglia, they're generally flat boards painted with figures. Here they are pierced in these tracery forms. The seating is all Victorian. You can see the choir stalls have their doors on them. This is more choir stalls with doors. There's the reading desk for the minister. And here's quite an interesting memorial. This is 1744, and you can see it's been painted, and some of the paint is still visible. We're reminded, and this is relatively unusual, you don't often see this with 18th century memorials, but of course a lot of it is imitating the Romans and the Greeks, and they did paint their statues. We see them today as white marble, but the white marble was the canvas that was then painted. Here we have again Elizabeth Price, and you can see here the little winged angel head there, which is rather fun. And there's the pulpit and the Bible in place. And all it is lacking here is a rustic old congregation. It is, as I say, it's a redundant church. You can just see the beer there in the vestry. It is a redundant church. It's not used for regular worship anymore, but it's maintained, and it could be brought back into use if needed. And there we are again. You can see why it was preserved. It's preserved because it is of great historical importance, and particularly this rood screen. This is the pride and joy. You can see how huge it is. Now, I suspect that door there is an access somewhere that lead access turret or something, or outside. Yes, there's a turret outside that leads up to the rood loft. You can just see, if we come over here and we can look up, we can see that there is a little door on that side. It is of course kept locked, and it's kept locked because that is a fragile loft, and also, dear me, insurance hazard. It's a hazard of falling, but that is a huge loft. So we process down the aisle. Let's go all the way back to the chancel step. There is just the one step, and there we see the full length of the building. It's broad. I say it's very like Clochainog, very similar in terms of size, and of course in having the screen. And Clochainog would originally have had a loft like this one. The loft at Clochainog has long since disappeared. The loft was probably small. I can't imagine they were all as broad as this one, because this is other lofts I've seen have been about that broad, but this is twice that. So plenty of room for your choir. And I suspect in the 18th century, and when they became a thing, you would have had your rustic church band there. There we are, looking outside through the window, and that's our cue to head outside and look at the outside of this marvellous building. So here we are outside St Mary's, Derwen, and you can see the big, solid and somewhat primitive porch. It looks primitive to us. It does its job. What's the problem? There is no problem with it. And behind me, you can just see the cross, the churchyard cross, which is one of the other glories of the building. We are here, high up in the hills. As I turn the camera around, making sure that I have equipped it to turn around. I'll explain what that building is later. What we see here behind me is that we are right up in the hills, and it's a long way down. We are in a glorious part of Denbighshire. Just turn this around again so we get the full effect of the cross. There's the cross. I shall cross in front of it there. So here we are in the churchyard, and we'll have a look around the outside. Again, it's a round churchyard, which is a sign of an ancient Celtic clan, an early Christian site. So we'll have a wander around the outside of the churchyard, and we'll come back and say a few words in closing. So there we have the churchyard cross. Now, as I said before, we've noted before, in the Middle Ages you didn't have individual gravestones. That's one reason why if someone talks about a medieval gravestone, be careful, unless it's one of those saddleback ones lying flat on the ground, someone is being naughty. There was a cross instead that represented all the burials. Now, very often you'll find a shaft still there, but here we have not just the shaft but the cross itself, and it's a particularly fine example. Again, 15th century, there would have been a cross head on the top, I suspect, or a pinnacle or something, but here we have, on this side, we have the baptism of the Lord Jesus. There, the baptism of Christ? No, we don't. No, we have the enthronement of the Virgin Mary. I'm sorry, it's nothing so biblical. This is, of course, the cult of the Virgin Mary. This is St Mary's Church, and it's the enthronement of the Virgin Mary. You've got Father and the Son either side, and the Holy Spirit is a dove above her head. All quite legendary, but that's the Middle Ages for you. This here, I said I'd talk about what it is. This is the Lich Gate, or it was the Lich Gate. It then became the church house. And when the church became redundant, initially, and when they sold the building to the Friends of Friendless Churches, initially this building was retained by the parish. It was recently at auction. I'm not sure what it sold for. It's tiny, and it was turned into a church house, and you can see at the bottom here, now you see it's a Lich Gate. Where's the gate? Well, there's the gate, there's the door, and there would have been, and there are of course inside steps down, but there would have been steps up, and then through here, and you would have entered the churchyard through this gate. Now it's been filled in, it's been turned into a church house. Now here we have the cross head again. On this side we have the crucifixion. We've got saints either side. Now, looking at this one, this is St Michael. You can tell because he's got wings and he's carrying scales for weighing of souls. Again, the porch is leaning outward rather alarmingly, but I'm told it's completely safe. Now, as we look into the porch, let's look into the porch, shall we, first of all. As we look into the porch, we can see again that red sandstone, and there's a stoop that would have been with water, holy water in it, for worshippers to remember their baptism by making the sign of the cross with the holy water. Again, we look back at that, the cross and the old Lich Gate. The Lich Gate has a room above it. Now that room would have been a schoolroom. It was then the church house, so it would still have been used as a schoolroom and as a room for meetings in. Now, and as we move over here, be a bit careful. I suspect it's been sold recently. It would make a lovely little holiday cottage for one, or an artist studio. And you can see here, look there down in the valley, see how high up we are, and the Carls, the main road the other side of the valley. This is it's a lovely little village, and there we have the cross and the church with its little bell cot. You can see the great big buttressing on that side, and that's not going to be a Lich Gate. It's going to be a beer house, I expect, there, because this is the Lich Gate, and I don't think this had two. And there you have the decorated cross. It's unusual to have the cross surviving like this. It tells us that, actually, unlike the rood screen, it tells us that the Reformation, the clergy and the parish and the people were not that interested in going over to a Protestant way of doing things, and so a lot survives at that time. Here we are again. You see there the little house, the Lich Gate, all these gravestones, the old yew trees. Yew trees are, because they're evergreens, they are symbols of resurrection. Also, you can make really good bows out of them, I'm told. But really, they were there for. They weren't there for that sort of practical purpose, I don't think. There we are again. You can see the porch is a later addition. We've got another one of those lovely red stone windows with that tracery in it. These windows appear windows of the 19th century. That one may well be, certainly the top half is. because it's the style is much too early to be original, because this is a 15th century church. And there's the old school down the hill, and again that road takes us back down into the valley. And again, this is where the people lived in the Middle Ages. They didn't live so much in the valleys as in the hills, where you have, of course, broad sweeping meadows. It's another matter entirely. But here, and there we have, if you can see there, the church, the lich gate and the cross, and then that wonderful big east window. And we ascend by steps, because the church is on the side of the hill, the north side, the ground is higher, so we ascend via graveyard steps up into the graveyard, the upper graveyard. Yes, there's a beer house there, I thought it was. And actually you see here, this is the stair turret for the rood, and probably a little vestry as well at the bottom. It's where you go up into the rood. Yes, here's a little vestry, you can see the chimney there, and there where the heating plant in the basement is. Again, that is not the willow carved on this slate stone, slate being a relatively local material. Here we've got, sadly the sun is in the wrong place for this, for looking at the north side, but the north side you can see the windows there, window in the chancellor's original. The rood stairs are in that little extension, which is quite handy. No, that's the oil tank. Not that, I mean what I thought was a beer house, actually an oil tank. And as we back up here, we can see down from above the beauties of Derwen. You can see why the church has been retained, been rescued, even though it's no longer used for worship, because it is a building that is extraordinarily ancient. And that little house, I do hope that somebody makes a nice little holiday cottage of it or something. I know some people wouldn't like living with a graveyard next to them, but the reality is that there's nothing wrong with that. It's just and if you think it's just a matter of superstition. Well, again, I'm not going to record a two-camera epilogue. This has gone on quite a bit longer than I expected it would, and largely me gushing over how amazing this building is. 2 bells, you see. So I'll just sign off here, and hope you enjoy these videos. I do enjoy making them, and give me something to do on my holiday, and a way to share my holiday with people. So thank you very much for watching, and may God bless you and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.